The woman in the oversized jacket never looked up. She didn't make eye contact, didn't smile, didn't speak. Her name was Maya, and she had a secret no one in that coffee shop could have guessed. She just sat there, hour after hour, sketching faces from memory. Faces of people she'd never met, places she'd never been, lives she'd never lived. But there was something about her work, something that didn't belong on the streets. The staff let her stay as long as she bought one coffee. Sometimes she did, sometimes she couldn't. But that Tuesday morning, someone noticed. Someone who understood what it meant to tell a story without words. Someone who saw past the worn shoes and weathered hands and recognized something impossible to ignore. Angelina Jolie didn't just see a homeless woman, she saw an artist the world had forgotten, and what she discovered about Maya's past would leave her speechless. Because Maya wasn't always homeless, and the drawing in her hands, it wasn't just art, it was a message, one that Angelina was about to decode. Before we continue this powerful story of talent, loss, and second chances, tell me in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those whose voices were silenced, but whose art never stopped speaking. The coffee shop on Sunset Boulevard wasn't fancy. It wasn't the kind of place celebrities usually stopped, but it was quiet. And for Maya, it was one of the few places that let her exist without asking questions. She had been coming there for 8 months, always the same corner table, always the same routine. She'd order a small black coffee, make it last 3 hours, and fill page after page of her sketchbook with faces that lived only in her memory. The baristas knew her, not her name, not her story, just her presence. The manager, a man named Carlos, had a soft spot for her. He never rushed her out, never asked her to leave when she couldn't afford a second cup. Sometimes when the shop was closing, he'd slip her a day-old pastry wrapped in a napkin. Maya never asked for it, never expected it, but she always nodded in quiet gratitude. Most customers didn't notice her. They were too absorbed in their laptops, their phones, their conversations about auditions and agents and deals that would change their lives. Maya had stopped listening to those conversations long ago. They reminded her too much of a life she used to live. Because Maya wasn't always sitting in the corner of a coffee shop with secondhand clothes and hands stained with charcoal. Once she had a name people recognized. Once her work hung in galleries from New York to Paris. Once she was someone, but that was before the fire, before she lost everything, before the world moved on without her. Now she was just the woman in the corner, the one people glanced at and quickly looked away from, the one whose talent went unseen because no one bothered to look close enough. Until that Tuesday morning, Angelina Jolie wasn't supposed to be there that morning. Her usual schedule had her across town for a UN meeting, but the meeting had been postponed and she found herself with an unexpected hour of freedom. Her assistant had suggested a chain cafe nearby, but Angelina shook her head. She wanted something quieter, something real, so her driver took a different route, and when she saw the small coffee shop with its faded awning and mismatched chairs, she asked him to stop. She walked in alone. No security, no entourage, just a woman in sunglasses and a simple coat, trying to find a moment of peace in a life that rarely offered it. The barista recognized her immediately, but said nothing, just took her order with a polite nod and let her be. Angelina appreciated that. She ordered an oat milk latte and looked around for a place to sit. That's when she saw her. Maya was in the corner, hunched over her sketchbook, completely absorbed in her work. Her fingers moved with precision, her eyes focused, her expression calm despite the chaos of the world around her. Angelina didn't mean to stare, but something about the woman's posture, the way she held the pencil, the intensity of her concentration, it reminded Angelina of artists she'd worked with on film sets. The ones who saw the world differently, the ones who couldn't stop creating even if they wanted to. Angelina sat down 2 tables away. She sipped her latte and tried to focus on her phone, but her eyes kept drifting back to the woman in the corner. And then she saw the drawing. Maya didn't look up. She never did. She'd learned long ago that making eye contact led to conversations she didn't want to have, questions she didn't want to answer, pity she didn't want to accept. But Angelina didn't ask a question. She just stood there looking at the drawing, and then quietly she said, "That's beautiful." Maya's hand stopped mid-stroke. She didn't look up, but her shoulders tensed. She wasn't used to compliments. Not anymore. Angelina didn't wait for a response. She just kept talking, her voice soft but genuine. "I've worked with a lot of artists, some of the best in the world, and I have to say, what you just created, it's rare. Really rare." Maya finally looked up, and for the first time in 8 months, she made eye contact with someone who wasn't looking at her with pity or discomfort. Angelina was looking at her with respect. "Thank you," Maya whispered. Her voice was hoarse from disuse. Angelina smiled gently. "Can I see more?" Maya hesitated. No one had asked to see her work in years. Not since the fire, not since everything fell apart, but something about the woman standing in front of her, something about the way she looked at the drawing instead of the worn jacket and tired eyes, made Maya nod. She turned the pages slowly. Portrait after portrait, landscapes, abstract pieces, each one more stunning than the last. Angelina didn't say a word. She just stood there, taking it all in, her expression shifting from curiosity to awe to something deeper. Finally, she looked at Maya and asked, "What's your name?" "Maya," she said quietly. "Maya," Angelina repeated as if committing it to memory. "I'm Angelina." Maya's eyes widened slightly. She knew who Angelina Jolie was. Everyone did, but she didn't react the way most people would. She didn't ask for a photo or an autograph. She just nodded once as if to say, "I see you too." Angelina sat down across from her, and for the next 20 minutes, they talked. Not about fame or Hollywood or red carpets. They talked about art, about what it means to create something from nothing, about how the world sees you versus how you see yourself. And slowly, carefully, Maya began to tell her story. Maya hadn't always been homeless. Once she had a life most people would envy. A studio in downtown Los Angeles. Gallery representation. Collectors who paid thousands for her work. She was on the rise. A name people in the art world whispered with admiration. But then, 3 years ago, everything changed. A fire broke out in her studio late one night. She was working on a new series, pieces she believed would be her breakthrough. She barely made it out alive. But everything else, her paintings, her supplies, her records, gone. All of it. Insurance didn't cover it. The building owner denied responsibility. And without proof of ownership for most of her work, Maya had no way to prove what she'd lost. Her gallery dropped her. Her collectors moved on. And within 6 months, she was out of money, out of options, and out of hope. She tried to start over, tried to rebuild, but without a studio, without resources, without a network, no one would take her seriously. She applied for grants, reached out to old contacts, but in the art world, if you disappear, you're forgotten, and Maya had disappeared, so she ended up on the streets, not by choice, not because she gave up, but because sometimes life doesn't give you a second chance. Sometimes the world just moves on, and yet she never stopped drawing. Even when she had nothing, she found scraps of paper, broken pencils, anything she could use. Because for Maya, art wasn't a career, it was survival. It was the only thing that kept her sane in a world that had stopped seeing her as human. Angelina listened to every word. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty sympathy. She just listened, the way few people ever had. When Maya finished, there was a long silence. Then Angelina said, "You didn't lose your gift." The world just stopped looking. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't cried in months, maybe years, but something about hearing those words from someone who understood what it meant to be seen broke something open inside her. Angelina reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. She wrote something on the back and handed it to Maya. "I want you to come to this address tomorrow," Angelina said. "Bring your sketchbook. Bring whatever you have. I'm going to introduce you to someone." Maya stared at the card. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Angelina looked her in the eye. "Because talent like yours doesn't deserve to be hidden, and because I believe everyone deserves a second chance." The next day, Maya stood outside the address on the card. It was a gallery in West Hollywood. Not just any gallery, one of the most prestigious in the city, the kind of place she used to dream about when she was starting out. She almost didn't go inside, almost turned around and walked away. But something about the way Angelina had looked at her work, the way she'd listened without judgment, made her take a breath and push open the door. Inside, Angelina was waiting, and with her was the gallery owner, a woman named Diane, who had spent decades discovering new talent. Angelina didn't waste time. She showed Diane the photos she'd taken of Maya's sketches. Diane studied them in silence, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Maya. "Do you have more?" she asked. Maya nodded and carefully pulled out her sketchbook. Diane flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes narrowing in concentration. When she reached the last page, she closed the book and looked at Angelina. "Where did you find her?" Diane asked. "In a coffee shop," Angelina said simply. Diane turned back to Maya. "I want to represent you. I want to give you a solo show 3 months from now." Maya couldn't speak. She just stood there, trying to process what she'd just heard. Diane continued, "But you'll need a studio. Supplies. Time to create new work. I'll cover the costs. Consider it an investment." Maya's hands trembled. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Diane smiled. Because Angelina doesn't bring me work unless it's exceptional. And because the art world needs to remember that talent doesn't disappear just because life gets hard. Angelina placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You didn't lose your gift, Maya. You just needed someone to see it again. Over the next 3 months, Maya worked harder than she ever had. Diane set her up in a studio space, provided her with supplies, and gave her the freedom to create without pressure. Angelina checked in regularly, not as a celebrity doing charity, but as someone who genuinely cared about Maya's journey. The show opened on a Friday night in October. The gallery was packed. Critics, collectors, and art lovers filled the space, drawn by the story as much as the work. But when they saw Maya's paintings, the story didn't matter anymore. The art spoke for itself. By the end of the night, 12 pieces had sold. Maya stood in the corner, overwhelmed, watching people admire work she'd created in the darkest period of her life. Angelina found her near the end of the evening. How does it feel? She asked. Maya looked around the gallery at the red dots next to her paintings, at the people who finally saw her again. Like I'm real, she whispered. Angelina smiled. You were always real, Maya. The world just needed to catch up. That night changed everything for Maya, but it wasn't just about the sales or the recognition. It was about being seen again, being valued, being given a chance to rebuild when the world had written her off. Diane continued to represent her. Maya's work began appearing in galleries across the country, and with the money she earned, she didn't just rebuild her life. She started a foundation to help other artists who'd lost everything, to give them the second chance she'd been given. Angelina never took credit. She never posted about it on social media or used it for publicity. For her, it wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what was right, about using her privilege to amplify a voice that deserved to be heard. And Maya, she never forgot the woman who stopped to look at her work when everyone else walked by. The woman who saw past the worn jacket and tired eyes and recognized something the world had overlooked. Because sometimes all it takes is one person, one moment of attention, one act of kindness, and a life that was invisible becomes impossible to ignore. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone whose talent was overlooked? Someone the world stopped seeing, but who never stopped creating? Share their story in the comments. Say their name. Let others know who they are before the silence takes over. Because here at Celebrity Stories, we believe that the most powerful stories aren't always about fame. They're about the people who remind us that everyone deserves to be seen. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe, share, and help us make sure voices like Maya's are never silenced again. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, if you ever pass someone whose work deserves attention, stop, look, you might just change a life.